I even ask you this question?
I'm just a bundle of nerves. All
Poor
the time.
Neve. Hello and welcome to Literary Canon Ball, a podcast for anyone who wants a fun and feisty conversation about books. Literary Canon Ball is inspired by the work of the Stella Count and the Vida Survey that reveal the ongoing gender imbalance in the conversations we have about books. We are striving to correct some of that imbalance by talking about books written by women from around the world. I'm Kirby Fenwick and I'm joined by...
Neve Marnie. I'm student by day, writer, editor by night, and reader by nature.
Nice. And...
B. Murphy, Keen Bean.
Can I just say, what are you going to do when you've finished uni?
Yeah, well, I've still got... Actually, that was like a struggle, because when I finished PW, I'm like, oh shit, am I going to have to like...
Change your intro? Yeah.
But then I did another course, so...
So you've got like 18 months to 2 years to think about a new one.
Yeah.
Good.
I'll come up with something.
I believe you.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean a new degree to do? I reckon you're going to be on a roll of like endless degrees.
It's such a good intro, so I think you should just study endlessly. Masters, maybe a PhD.
More degrees than a thermometer.
Nice.
And endless money to do those degrees.
Oh,
would also be nice.
Don't worry about that. So, to our book for episode 11. We're up to the double digits. Woo, we're nearly a teenager. Why God is a Woman is a collection of prose poetry from Nin Andrews about a magical island where women rule. But the story of this female utopia is told from the memories of a man, exiled from the island, who looks back with both nostalgia and bitterness. Neve, you suggested we read this one. You're on a bit of a roll. You've done the last few books. Why did you want to chat about this one?
Okay, so basically... I was recommended this by a booktuber who I really love. Her channel name is Just Kiss My Frog. Her actual name is Leena Norms. She works in the UK publishing industry, and so I was told about this book like a few years ago, and I was sort of like, oh wow, this is super interesting. Like, I'm in the same blog. She actually talks about Vivek Shraya, Even This Page is White, so I sort of was recommended those books at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really know a huge amount about it other than sort of like a basic synopsis, but I'm sort of like, I think it was the title that really drew me in.
It's a very provocative title, isn't it?
Yeah. And yeah, I trusted Leena, and so now we're reading it here.
What did you think, Faye?
Well, we'll stick with the title first. On the cover of the book, the is capitalized and the isn't. And to me that like stuck out immediately, because I was like, is that a deliberate choice of like a really definitive is? So
I didn't even notice that until you've just pointed it out.
Yeah, and now I'm never going to unsee that.
Yeah, I'm never going to unsee it either.
Well, I saw it straight away and I kept thinking about it the whole time, mainly probably because of the social media. I was like, thinking, oh, do I capitalize this is or not? Is it an artistic choice or a grammatical error? I don't know. What are the caps locks conventions? And so I thought about it quite a lot. But the book itself, I found the premise really alluring. So basically the idea of inverting gender roles and placing women as the dominant, powerful gender on the island, and they're the basis of all myths and legends, and they have the high-powered jobs. I found that quite exciting. The actual reading of it, I found incredibly repetitive and disengaging. I got to a point where I felt like the poet Nin Andrews was kind of skirting over the great concept, but without going into it with depth and detail, given that it's a couple of 200 pages or so.
It's pretty short.
Yeah, it's not even 100 pages.
Yeah.
So there's multiple poems in it, but I didn't feel like it kind of got going.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way.
Mm.
The name of the book captured my attention straight away, even though I'm not religious in any sense. Just, it was quite provocative, and I'm like, yeah, this is right up my alley. And like you said, Fee, the concept was like, oh my God, like this is going to be so good. But I kind of feel like it was a bit shallow in some places because, you know, taking the patriarchy and just kind of like making it a matriarchy is like not super subversive, really, I don't think. And maybe that's not what she was trying to do, but it just felt like we were just taking these stereotypical, you know, patriarchal traditional gender roles and then just flipping them, you know. And the boys have these like little Barbie dolls that you support or whatever, I can't remember the name. Yeah, that you're supposed to live up to, and you know, the women are in power and it's all about the female orgasm and, you know, all that sort of thing. And I think there's so much potential with an idea like this and a concept like this to really be really nuanced and really sort of dive into it. But I just am not sure if she did. And I wonder whether it's the prose poetry, because I was thinking about this during the week. It kind of straddles that line between poetry and prose. That's why it's called prose poetry. But it's kind of like you're reading this and you almost forget that it's poetry. And I wonder if, you know, the reason why I felt like there was some depth missing was because I'm reading it as prose. I'm not reading it as poetry. And so I'm reading it going, oh, why aren't we delving deeper into this? Why aren't we having like more complex conversations about this? Why aren't we getting deeper? But it's poetry.
I kind of feel though that poets like Anne Carson who write prose poetry, but it's identifiable as poetry more aesthetically from the line length and the stanzas, and it's quite clear cut. But she goes into aching places and depth with such an economy of words that it's breathtaking and fascinating. What I struggle with this book was that it's a strong concept that I felt was executed in a half way. So it's kind of marketed and sold as that inversion idea of gender roles. But I kept reading it thinking, oh, you've maintained that gender role there, which is confusing because you've flipped other things. So, for example, one poem says the line, she knows that every man in his 40s wants to be someone else. And she kind of explores in that poem of the midlife crisis that men go through. I was like, that's pretty like a gender trope that is held up in this present world that we're in rather than the mythical world of the island. So I was a bit confused that she didn't go all the way with things or really subvert things. And one thing that I found I would really love to hear your opinion about is how she depicts women in it, that they're all pretty much clones of Angelina Jolie.
Yeah, that was very unclear to me because I'm sort of like, do they all just kind of look about like Angelina Jolie?
Or are they just all called Angelina?
Well, no, they're not all, like, they all have, I think there's a line that, like, they all have different names, but people like the women like to be called Angelina.
What did you think about the book?
I don't know. See, like, I read it front to back, which I think I recommend doing. I think
You what? You read it front to back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like in one sitting?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you meant that you read it from the last poem to the first poem, but that's not even what you said, so my apologies.
Yeah, well, I read it in 2 sittings, but I read it from, beginning to end. I didn't dip in and out, as sometimes you do with poetry books.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked it. I think there are some poems that resonated more with me than others, especially when I think she starts going into stuff about death. I don't feel like that was very well explored. For me, anyway. Like, I think, like, that could have been, especially that whole concept of, like, the celebrities going into the island and, like, there's a daughter death. I think she flirts with it, but then doesn't really go very far in depth.
I got quite confused why that was there. and how that related to her original idea, because in the opening of the book, in the dedication, she poses the clear question, what does it mean to be a woman? Which I thought, that's a fabulous question. Let's dive into this. I don't think she really explores that question, and then kind of goes off in this different direction of death, which I didn't know what her point was. I like the image of that death's door was actually a door, and then they realized maybe we should hide this door because people are fixated on death. But people are still fixated on death even if they can't see the door. Yeah. But I didn't know why that was there in a conversation surrounding gender specifically.
I felt a bit the same. I wonder whether the concept was she tried to do too much. Yeah. Like, because she touches on a lot of different things. You know, as you're reading each poem, it's sort of, you know, there's lots of little, like, you know, she's talking about politics, and she's talking about, like, homemaking, and she's talking about, like, you know, teenage girls and boys being treated differently, and, like, so she touches on, like, all these sort of different little elements, but I wonder whether it was too much. Yeah. And it would have been better to kind of maybe only have a couple of those things, but really kind of explore them and tease them out a bit more.
I agree. Yeah. It felt like she was skirting over a lot of different things, not ticking boxes, but she addressed fashion and how men wore dresses, and men are simply unfinished ladies is one line, which I thought was quite, it had a nice ring to it. I was like, oh, that's a really nice spin.
Well, it alludes to that idea of women being unfinished men.
That's why I really liked it, because it's, to me, it's a clear illusion and an exciting illusion. Let's go into this. But then she was on to the next idea before going into the idea of what is finished and unfinished, and what's something new to be added to the conversation. I didn't feel like she was adding new ideas rather than just changing the gender.
Yeah, well, I think for me, my worry with this book was that it was going to be sort of like one of those videos where it's sort of like, what would happen if straight were gay, and it's very like naff, and like it doesn't really go into like the actual structural discrimination. It's very like surface level. I think she mostly avoids that in terms of like it's in how she reverses it. You can sort of see in the book what it would possibly be like if the feminine were upheld in the same way the masculine was. And so that and I think in sort of covering a whole lot of ground, I feel like she sort of swerved away from that naff area.
But where did she swerve to? Like, do you think she landed in a good place to tell that story, or do you think it was more a duck and weave away from controversial sort of?
Well, I feel like you can't even sort of read this as like a 21st century like exploration of gender, because I feel like we've moved away so much from that binary in our in the most cutting edge, like in our cutting edge conversations. It's not about men and women. It's completely sort of...
It's much broader than that.
Yeah, exactly. It's taking ourselves away from that binary. In this island, I'm kind of imagining it as like set in what I would imagine to be like the 50s of like, you know what I mean? And that I feel like that's how I sort of entered into it. Like, not as in like a present day sort of expression of gender, but in like a sort of a reversing of gender if like the matriarchy was prominent in like a 50s era.
But that's where I kind of trip up, because I was like, there for a period of time it's timeless, the island, where I was like, that's interesting. It's like this concept that women have had to, and men, of like fighting against gender roles is a almost timeless issue. But then when it comes to the celebrities and time stamping it with Angelina Jolie and Frank Sinatra, I was like, I'm kind of a little bit lost in the storytelling aspect here, because that places it in a more immediate time frame that I was like, I just don't understand the Angelina Jolie bit.
But it was told, it's told from the perspective of is someone that's been exiled from the island, a boy/man, boy that became a man. So he's remembering. So I can kind of see then the, you know, like that nostalgic look back through the sort of that time. And then I wonder if he's sort of putting the Angelina thing over the top of it in a more contemporary setting. I don't know, but I can see what you're saying with that kind of, and I mean, to be honest, when those celebrities popped up, I'm like, what? I was a bit confused about why they were there.
Yeah, if I was the editor of this, I'd sort of be like, I know on the back it's like she's tackling death and like sexual politics. I'm like, I feel like just either explore it more deeply or cut it out because it's just there.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's lines and some like images and ideas in this that are really sharp. But
I agree.
They're not. But then there are quite a few other things that just sort of are expressed but then left alone.
I found it quite interesting that a lot of these poems have been published widely, separately, as standalone pieces in a number of literary journals, and now it's been collected into one volume, and she would have had to order it in some way and because it's been sold as a prose poem project, so all the poems are linked in some form, and they've been ordered deliberately so that you do, as like you were saying, as opposed to like a normal collection or a different collection of poems of dipping in and out. This is guiding you from start to finish. That maybe she doesn't have a cohesive narrative for them. I don't know, because maybe they were written over a long period of time, and they're true. I felt like they didn't really kind of meld together.
I didn't feel like a disconnect between each piece, because for me, when I'm reading it, I'm thinking that it's this narrator and he's just like dropping these memories on me, and there isn't necessarily an overarching, like the only sort of overarching narrative is like him and his kind of experience of being there and then not being there, and you know, his feelings about that. But I can kind of see what you're saying. If they have been published in all these different places and then you try and put it together, that, I mean, you're trying to maybe force something.
Because I don't know if I was doing that as a reader, trying to force
a narrative.
A narrative onto it, because I had read about the Y publications before approaching this collection, so I knew that it was written over a period of time, published over a period of time, so I don't know if that affected how I approached each piece and trying to either get them to stand alone or stand together and be strung along. And it's just, I did a lot of thinking in this book, and I don't know if that was the poet's intention, if I should have been feeling, I don't even know how the poet would want me to feel, if there was a specific sense of like freedom or righteousness of, we can like change gender roles, or they're static and we're stuck with them. I'm not sure how I felt during the process of reading it.
Yeah. Well, I think I sort of approached it like, even though it was prose, I sort of approached it like how I approached most poetry, which is just like to feel it. I mean, I kind of read it as though it's like a world building exercise that's just one after the other, and you just get more and more layers.
That's a really interesting thought. Yeah.
So that was why I kind of enjoyed it, even though there are bits that are a bit more flat, because I was sort of just, I was sort of like, I don't really want to super overthink this. I just want to sort of read it and let sort of the ideas and things sort of wash over me. And there are some bits, like I think the last line, like I'm not sure exactly why it like really struck me, but it did. Like, one day my mother told me God is a woman. She said someday I would understand. And for some reason that just was like, whew, that really like gutted me. And I don't know if that's maybe me bringing my own like concepts of like my own like personal baggage of like being raised Catholic and being raised in that sort of like very patriarchal religion, and so that was sort of where I was coming from. But there are definitely bits I think where it's really strong, especially when she's talking about how like virginity and how the expectation that, well, in this book, that men must remain like chaste, and that whole double standard. I feel like she did that fairly well, and there are some areas that I felt were done quite well, but yeah, overall I think maybe it could have been tightened up.
Sharper, yeah.
Yeah.
I think there are some gorgeous lines in there. I agree with what you said before, Neve, that there are some really sharp lines. I really enjoyed the part where she goes into the idea of beauty, and there's but beauty, Islanders claim, has its own logic, and then she starts exploring that through body hair, and there's this gorgeous line of, it was as if a shadow were taking over my body, and that's from the perspective of the boy becoming a man, and he's starting to tackle hair and what that is and having to get rid of it. But that was quite a stunning way of describing the growth of hair, of it being like this quite shadowy sort of uncloth thing.
And then there's the, that idea of a shadow of being something that we don't talk about openly, just something that you go and deal with, but that's not something we as a community are going to discuss.
And it's unwanted.
There is some really beautiful stuff and some really beautiful images, and
there was another line at the beginning that I thought got me quite excited about the poems, and probably hoisted up my expectations to these lofty heights. But it was describing women, and they're coming home from work.
Oh yeah.
And they're coming home to their men, their children, their dogs. And I was like, yes, because, dogs are always framed up as man's best friend, and men have this leader-like relationship, like over the pack animal, and they're just, sort of this dominant, assertive figure. And I just really liked how she included dogs in the family unit as being like owned by one particular person in the family.
Oh, definitely. Also, going back to like the body hair and like the body sort of like the changing, I feel like there's one poem that kind of uses wings as like a stand-in for when like girls start like get their periods.
And
that was really good.
I read that somewhere when I was doing research about this book, about the wings being about periods. Yeah.
Yeah,
Please
and
read
so
it.
We should just explain the wings first.
Oh yes, men have wings in this this world. There are some that don't develop wings, and it's sort of in the protagonist view, a lot of men sort of envied those wingless men because they were sort of able to avoid a lot of the objectification.
But the wings were like a status symbol almost, weren't they?
The larger the wings, the more attractive the man.
Yeah. So the wings were sort of, I think the wings were a really strong symbol because they were very polemic. You could have attached a whole lot of different ideas to the wings. So I think good choice. Should I read like just some of the lines or the full? It's not super long.
Go for it.
So this is the wing poem. On the island where I come from, both male and female children have mango-sized brains, but in adolescence, the male brain expands due to a sudden hormonal flood. The larger size is needed to accommodate the male biological needs, the stretching of his bones, muscles, and wings. Everyone can see the transformation as it occurs. First, the head begins to swell, then the feet and hands. Soon, the arms hang long and limp by the boy's sides. He hunches his shoulders, looks down or away, as if he could hide his desperation, the sudden turmoil and aches and twinges, the pain like 1,000 insects fluttering beneath his skin. He twitches all day and night and wishes he could curl back into the boy he was yesterday, last week, or last year. Soon enough, he knows, he will have to learn to fly. He will leap into the waiting air. His body will make sure of that, even as he cries out silently, "No, please, no." Yeah. And also, like, the thing of, like, boys being snatched by, and the whole idea of having, like, a sex slave trade as well.
And snatched and sold,
And, I think one of the other really sharp lines that I'm not sure if we're able to find it is like having the men always being on guard. Like, I feel like a lot of women are on guard when they're in public spaces as well. I thought that was well done. That really stuck out to me. Yeah.
I still feel so like, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I feel. I wonder whether, like you alluded to, Fee, or what you said before, is maybe I just had these really huge expectations for this book. Maybe I expected so much, just too much from it.
Whereas I had super low expectations because I was like, ooh, this could go really badly. And so when it was actually like fairly okay, I was like, okay, great.
Yeah. So we were coming from two very different places.
Yeah.
I really like a couple of the myths in there, and I kind of wished it went into that a little bit more, because again, the blurb says that the myths and legends are based around women dominating, and or they come from women. And there was this really interesting section of how men are always awake at night, which I was a bit kind of like, oh, that's a bit odd. And it was threaded throughout many poems, and it finally gets to this crescendo at the end of God gets fed up of men just staying awake all night, staring to the heavens, just going, oh, I'm just like this, I'm so confused, world, God, whatever. So that God created orgasm so that men would have an orgasm and then fall into a deep, deep sleep and stop pissing her off. And I thought that is like really witty and clever, and I just kind of wish there was fewer poems and just more of those moments throughout, because it, like what you were saying, Neve, it does feel like there are sections of there's extra words that didn't really add to the concept and idea necessarily.
Oh, exactly. Because I feel like that was one of the few things where it was like illuminated to, and it went and there was like really nice payoff. So you went back and you could see it, and you're like, oh, okay, that was really well explored. Whereas with some of it, I was sort of like, why is this here? What?
Yeah. Yeah, that was sort of my, I remember feeling that as I was reading it. What did you think about having the exiled man be the narrator?
I think it works because it positions him as both insider and outsider, and that's a good place to be.
And it puts the telling of the women in a very particular light, doesn't it?
I found that he seemed somewhat of a vessel, even though it kind of shows some emotions. He doesn't really own those feelings necessarily, and I thought it was a lot of telling that was happening on the island. So I found it quite shocking is the wrong word, but jarring is probably closer. Of in one poem his name's revealed, because I kind of thought of him as just being this nameless face of vessel, just choose not so much a sage, but like bearing witness to things, but it's not him so much, it's more the events that he's bearing witness to is where the focus is.
Yeah.
So I found that kind of interesting.
Yeah. Maybe all we're just wanting is a little bit more consistency with the, like, just like, a sustained sort of, either like him sort of being quite present in it or not, or like, because I feel like it dips in and out, which is okay, especially in the terms of the fact that these are memories, and I feel like memories dip in and out of reality. I mean, some of the language, like some of the poems are incredibly heightened to a point where you're sort of like, I don't know how literal you're being about what's happening. And then some poems you could see that they're quite direct and pointed flip of our own sort of world.
Would you recommend it to people?
I don't know. I mean, maybe, but I'd give them my own copy so they won't have to buy one.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
What about you, Kirby?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. It might be something that I have to come back to. I don't know, because I'm still not really sure if I actually got anything out of this. But I think, like you said, Neve, if I was going to, I would lend somebody my copy.
Yeah.
Rather than saying you must go and buy this. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still undecided. What about you, Fee?
There are sections that I really enjoy. There are a few incredible lines and images, and she's obviously very talented with words. As a collection, I didn't feel that it kind of held my interest. I found myself kind of getting a little bit... I just lost interest in it, really. And I
feel like we had very similar reading experiences, because I did have to force myself to finish it.
See, you know what? It's funny. I think because I was when I was reading this for the first time, I was stuck. I had to. It's actually my mother's birthday, and I had to stay at the park to reserve the bench. So it was basically me, like sitting there for an hour, and all I had was this. So I feel like maybe that like colored my reading perception, because I was sort of like, it's this or nothing. And so, but the thing is, like, overall, I really enjoyed it, even though, like, maybe because I was trying to be a bit more generous in my reading because there was nothing else to do. And there was, there were a whole lot of points, even when it seemed very obvious. Like, I think maybe it's because we're all very, like, au fait with a lot of feminism and, like, gender politics. But I'm trying to imagine if you weren't. I feel like a lot of these like points that she makes could be quite revelatory.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I feel like we've all sort of had conversations about feminist books that have come out recently and about who the audience is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe it's about, not necessarily about the book, but about the reader. And maybe... Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I agree with you. I think there's some really interesting elements that if you were not, particularly deep into feminism and that sort of thing, you could read some of this stuff and be like, oh, and that would maybe shift your perspective a little bit.
That was something I did think about whilst reading this, like, who is this for? But I kept getting tripped up because there are some sections where I was like, you need knowledge to understand the point she's making, because there are some poems that was quite subtle and you needed to have read things to get the context of the gist of what she was saying. In other sections, it was more quite a blatant, clear play on gender roles that it seemed like anyone, regardless of whether they've read feminist theory or not, would make clear connections to. Yeah. But because it shifted from one to the other consistently, that I just got really lost in the logic of what this is and didn't enjoy the art of it as much, because I didn't know how much where I should position myself as a reader, because I want to be kind and generous, but at the same time I want to know if this is for me or not for me.
And maybe some of that comes back to it being a collection built from previously published works. Yeah. And so there, maybe some of that comes down to that, really. That sort of disjointed sort of thing comes down to that fact.
I'd be quite excited to read her other work, though, because I think she is incredibly talented.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in reading more work of hers, for sure.
And I think she poses a fantastic question, just I don't think this collection answers it or attempts to find answers to that opening question of what does it mean to be a woman.
I think that was like a jumping off point for her. I think
I'll be interested to find out if that's where she jumped from, or is that where she kind of, once it's all together, kind of synthesized it as being like, this is what I've done.
Yeah, well, I don't think she would, because the womanhood she presents here isn't necessarily exploration of womanhood, like in our own world, and I don't feel like her presentation of masculinity in this world is necessarily like a perfect analog for like women's experiences in our world. I feel like it was more of like an exploration of what matriarchy or at least having like one dominant gender, like the sort of the horror of what that can be and what the implications
regardless of what gender it is.
Yeah,
that's more what I read and felt during the reading, rather than I don't think she answered
because you're not
that question.
I'm not reading it going, wow, what a great island this is, like I want to live here. I'm reading it going, it doesn't matter what gender it is. When you position one as the power and the dominant, it sucks for everyone.
Yeah.
That's a good place to end on. Okay, so to our recommendations, what have we been reading and watching and listening to that we want to give the 2 thumbs up to? Shall I go first?
Do it!
Okay, so I've got a couple this month and they're quite different. Very, very different, I would suggest. The first one is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte.
Yay!
And there's a particular reason that I want to recommend this. Because I imagine that a lot of people have actually already read this book, but this is a specific recommendation to anyone that hasn't, or who has a particular aversion to classics. Read it. You just need to give yourself time to get past or to get into the world of the language and to the world that this book is set in, and you will find an amazing character in Jane Eyre and a really great story, even if there are some problematic moments. As somebody who has been probably intimidated a little bit by classical literature and probably a little bit, Western canon, which works for the podcast. I really got a lot out of reading this book, and I really... I can really recommend it to people that maybe have felt the same way that I have to jump in. And the next one is very, very, very different to Jane Eyre, although perhaps not, is Jessica Jones, which is the Netflix series. The second season dropped recently on Netflix. I'm not even finished the second season, but I'm going to throw a recommendation in here anyway, because it's just such a great series. Really strong female character that is like an anti-hero in many respects, and is not perfect, and is, kind of messed up in a lot of ways, and, makes some really bad decisions and what have you. But I think that's really, it's really good that we can have those characters on screen and that we can see them and that they can be okay. We don't have to have the perfect, leads for women don't have to be perfect. And she's not, and that's fine. But it's really great TV.
What's it about? Is it crime or drama?
Yeah, it's kind of crime. So she's a private investigator, but she is, she has powers. She has this like strength, this superhuman strength, and this like ability to heal really, really quickly. And she just sort of stomps around in these big black boots and this black leather jacket. And she's like, there's not much of her. Like she's quite small, short and thin, but she just has this sort of like swagger that she just takes on the world. But in the second series, it's much more about investigating how she came to be, like what happened for her to get these powers. And there's some really interesting stuff happening in the second season that I don't want to spoil, but I would recommend, if you haven't watched, go back and watch the first season, because that gives you a lot of it's really good, but also gives you a lot of grounding for the second season. But good TV, perfect for binging.
All Netflix is though.
Well, that's what it's made for, really.
Exactly.
All right, who's next?
Okay, well, I'll have a crack. So my first recommendation is called A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole. I actually have like a tree of how I actually got to this book, because it started with me listening to Hamilton, which is a musical, which is amazing.
Yes.
And then goes to like me discovering like Courtney Milan as a romance author, loving her, reading Hamilton's Battalion, which is like a book of short stories surrounding like the Civil War, like, and like with Hamilton and other, like, from diverse perspectives, which is actually really great. Then through that, discovering Alyssa Cole, which is why you should always read short stories collections, because
Yes, you should.
Yeah, they turn you on to great authors.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Alyssa Cole has a great set of books. Like, any book from her, I could probably recommend. But I'll recommend A Princess in Theory because it's kind of timely. The basic synopsis, it's set in New York. This woman, Naledi Smith, keeps getting what she believes to be spam emails from the prince of this small African country.
Yes.
As it turns out, it's not spam, and she is actually betrothed to this prince.
Oh, goodness.
But her parents took her to America at a very young age. And so the prince comes over, and sort of there's a romance. It's really great. Also, like, somehow it works really well as like a companion to Black Panther because of all the African sort of vibes in it. It's just really smart and funny. The main character is a scientist, totally a thing. And it discusses like sort of sexism in the workplace, especially in STEM. And like who doesn't secretly want like a princess story? Okay, maybe that's just me.
Depends what sort of princess story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, if it's basically like a grown-up version of the Princess Diaries.
Yeah, okay.
A girl who doesn't necessarily want to be a princess and is completely fine with like her life and stuff, you know, discovering that there's this whole identity she never knew about. Yeah.
I don't know about the princess story, but anytime I go back to Ireland, I'm always like to my grandparents, I'm like, so have you found me a farmer yet? Because I want some land.
Okay, and my second recommendation is The Right Kind of Blood by Rosanna Stevens. Yes, my handwriting is terrible. Basically, it's just an essay on periods and the shame around periods. There's just one paragraph I have to read because it's amazing. There's a scene in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets where Harry, trapped in the watery basement of Hogwarts, grabs a diary cursed with the spirit of his nemesis Voldemort, and using the fang of a basilisk, stabs the pages of the books to exorcise the darkness trapped within. From the stab wound, an inky blood bubbles, and the spirit is destroyed. A thick stain trickles over the book like a fast-moving bruise. This is the best metaphor I have been able to conjure for my period. In this scenario, once every monthish, I am Voldemort, the diary is my uterus, and Harry Potter wielding a fang is my period.
That is an original and robust metaphor.
Yeah. Lots of appreciation for that one.
Yeah, and it's just really well written, and I just really enjoyed it. There's a lot to unpack in this essay as well. So, yeah,
and it's an essay that's part of.
Oh yeah, sorry. Should mention that it's an essay part of the Best of the Lifted Brow Volume 2.
Yeah. And there's some really great stuff in there.
Yeah, definitely. Like, this is just one of
Lead with the period essay and keep reading.
Exactly. One of many great essays in here.
Awesome. I'm so reading that because, you know, I'm all about periods.
Yeah.
What you got, Fee?
Wow.
Sitting over there with a grin on your face.
I got a couple of things. I don't even know what to call this recommendation. I've kind of just entered the land of Twitter, and I'm like, what is this amazing book world I wasn't a part of before, and now I'm like obsessed with. But this is part of the disability community on Twitter, and it's a Twitter thread that was written by Sam Connor, and her Twitter handle is @CripWrites, and we'll like put it in the show notes. But on International Women's Day, she had 100 tweets threaded together, and it's I think it's absolutely necessary reading for all people, and it looks at the many different aspects of life with a disability as a woman, and it covers many different sections of that community and the intersections with disability. It's quite shocking, some of the statistics. She goes from statistics to direct advocacy and activism, and each tweet brings up a different idea. To read it as one thread is quite an incredible experience. As someone who, I've done some reading into disability and disability rights and have become involved in the community, but there are sections in this that I was like, I had no flippant idea, but she links to other people who speak on those ideas or other resources. So it's incredibly resource rich, idea rich, emotive, troubling, upsetting, but incredibly empowering to read. And I think it would be amazing to see it actually published as an essay or some form to make sure it doesn't get lost in the high speed place that is Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, definitely.
So
We'll definitely link to that. That sounds good.
it's a must read. Then there's also episode 640 of This American Life. It's called 5 Women, and it's a response to the Me Too movement, which the producer of it, Joffe-Walt, felt like the women weren't necessarily being explored in any depth in the stories that were coming out. They were more kind of positioned as evidence for the actions of men, and the light was placed more on the men, which is, as she says in a long-form interview, episode 285.
I was going to say, you didn't mention it, that there's a great long-form interview, but you're all over it.
Oh, it's such a fantastic double header where
Absolutely.
if you listen to This American Life first, and then you can get the backstory to it on long form. It's kind of a brilliant podcasting idea where you hear the story and then you hear how the story's made.
Absolutely.
And they just pair so nicely because structurally 5 Women is brilliant. It's fascinating, and it's 5 different women who have had some form of contact / relationship, working or personal, with this one particular man who has been outed as having a long history of sexual harassment in the workplace. And Hannah, who created the piece, doesn't just focus on him and their direct interactions with him. Each woman has a chance to discuss their past leading up to the point where they met him, and how that kind of triggers certain reactions and ways that they justify their behaviours.
It was so well done.
It's well done and compelling and shocking, but also completely relatable, and it's fabulous storytelling because the women are given a chance to tell their story with a lot of space.
Beyond just this one incident that happened to me.
Yeah. Because nothing in anyone's life is a standalone incident.
No way.
There's like history that predates it, and then it has ripple effects onwards, which a lot of the breaking stories in Me Too opened a floodgate of possibilities of stories, and it's really exciting to see how this particular story is approaching the subject and putting women at the centre of it. And it was good. That double header of 2 shows, it's 2 hours of amazing audio.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the last one I'm going to recommend, it's gotten 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Wow.
It's pretty flippin' good, not just in my opinion. And it's the TV show called Lovesick. Season 3 dropped about 6 weeks ago, and I devoured it in 2 seconds flat because it's amazing. Its original title is a British sitcom, and the original title was called Scrotum Recall.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah,
those are two very different titles.
Yeah, I don't know if I like the kind of direction Netflix went with Lovesick. I was kind of like, Scrotum Recall just sounds like it's hilarious. And this show is the sort of show where you immediately feel like you're a part of the friendship group in the characters. So they're in their sort of mid-20s. getting towards what it means to be a legit adult and have responsibilities and things like that. So they're on that cusp of they've been living at a home for a period of years, but they're starting, their friends and family are getting into more serious relationships and getting engaged and married and whatnot. And Dylan, the main character, discovers he has a sexually transmitted infection, and he has to contact all his previous partners to let them know that they should get tested, because he doesn't know when he picked up the infection, and he doesn't know who has it and if he spread it to other people. So he has to contact all his ex-girlfriends or anyone he's slept with. So he creates a list, and that formats the structure of the next few seasons of the TV show.
Yeah, right.
And it's structurally brilliant. So each episode is based on one previous girlfriend, and that's the title of the show. But it's never like a linear narrative. Like how they get into the past is always different, and it's kind of this interplay of it reenacts their relationship in some sections, and then it shows him coming back and then engaging with that person in the present and explaining why that relationship broke up or what happened. And it's kind of incredibly complex storytelling, because they create this really great world, and every character has a lot of depth and history, and they kind of roll that history out in this kind of piecemeal fashion over the 3 seasons. And there's a lot of great chemistry in it as well. Like the acting is just on point, and it's the sort of humor that just gets me clapping. There are numerous times where I paused and I was just like giving my computer a round of applause, and I was just like, this is so flippant well written. It's I'm gonna rewatch it all again, even though I've just watched it. It's just like such a romp. It's really good.
Excellent. Sounds interesting. What a diverse mix of recommendations we're handing out.
Yeah.
I know, kind of all modes and mediums.
It's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening to Literary Canon Ball. We hope you'll tune in again next month when we'll be talking about The Forgotten Rebels of Eureka by Claire Wright, which was the 2014 Stella Prize winner. So we're reading that in celebration of the announcement of the next Stella Prize winner.
Who will it be?
Yay! It's a really exciting shortlist, so I really can't wait to see who gets crowned. It's crowned, isn't it? There's a crown? Is it not a crown?
They get $50,000, and I'm sure there's a crown.
You can fashion
involved.
a crown out of $50,000.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if you want to continue the conversation, or if you just want to be digital friends, you can follow us on Twitter at Lit Canon Ball, on Instagram at Literary Canon Ball, or find us on Facebook. And if you have something to tell us that's a little more than 280 characters, send us an email. We love to get emails at literarycannonball@gmail.com.
And shout out to the emails that we have gotten.
Yeah.
There's been really some good recommendations, and we've also gotten some really nice mentions and comments on Facebook and Twitter and in person and Instagram stories.
And we love them. So thank you so much.
It really makes us just beam, and just, it's like a hug. It's really lovely.
It is like a hug.
Oh,
it's really
definitely.
sweet. Yeah.
And to make sure that you check out our website, we had a truck ton of recommendations, and you can get a full wrap of the show notes and links to all of those recommendations. And our website is literarycannonball.com.
Check it out.
Get on the interwebs. Now that I've finally discovered Twitter, and I'm like, oh my god, amazing. And I've got no time for life now. Sorry.
Oh, welcome to my world.
I'll send you a tweet.
Do it. All right, that's us done. Bye. But do you know what's another interesting tidbit about The Shape of Water, which I heard on Twitter? You can buy a dildo in the shape of the
I
thing.
know about that, yeah.
Whatever I didn't know what the name of the animal or the person or the
Aquaman.
whatever the Aquaman. But you can actually you can buy a dildo in the shape of that thing.
Oh yeah, but Del Toro's seen it and he's like, oh no, that's not what it looks like. And it's like, well, Del Toro, tell us what it looks like. Don't be a coward.